Technical session number 49, getting into operational procedures. Throughout this technical session, we're going to be able to describe the appropriate safety procedures for different technical scenarios. Hint, hint, we may be talking about fire extinguishers again. Apply the appropriate controls when faced with scenarios involving potential environmental impacts, like recycling. Summarize the process of addressing prohibited content, activity, and explain privacy, licensing, and policy concepts. Summarize the guidelines for using basic change management best practices. Always remember a rollback plan or a backup plan. All right. Behavioral skills and mindsets we want to keep in mind while working through this particular one. IT is a team sport. Our team members will have different strengths than us. We want to be able to capitalize on those strengths and learn from others that have strengths in areas we do not, as well as be able to teach our team members skills that we have acquired that they have yet to. This is how the teams become stronger. It's how you develop greater value in your teams, is through that shared knowledge and cross-training. Personal responsibility, as always. If you say you're going to do something, do it. Understanding the choices that we're making right now. Are we putting in sufficient amount of time to work towards this goal that we want of achieving the certification? That's where the guilt trip comes in. Just going to lay it on a little thick right now. Are we going to look back in about a month and a half from now and go, hey, you know what? I wish I'd have watched less TV. Who needs 8 hours of sleep a night? I could have gone with 6. Oh, who are we kidding? We could have gone with 2. You know, do we want to look back and say, you know, we could have put in more time? No, we typically don't. But personal responsibility isn't all bad. Yeah, we own up to the bad things that we do, but also own up to the good things we do. Like, hey, I was the one that saved you guys $1 million. I should get a raise. You should be your best advocate and cheerleader on your team. Doesn't mean you need to brag every minute of the day, but when it comes down to especially review time, don't be shy about the things you've accomplished. All right, so operational procedures. As a, who figured out the annotator? As a provider of a hands-on service like repairing, it shocks me that people figured it out this late in the game. His service like repairing, maintaining, upgrading computers, IT professionals need to be aware of general safety tips so as not to harm themselves, others, or the equipment. So it's very important to understand the controls to manage devices and power, the process of incident response, and legal requirements, while keeping good communication skills throughout. So the main areas we're going to be talking about in this particular session, we're going to be talking about safety procedures, being aware of the fun of electricity and the effects it can have on us and other equipment, also being aware of ESD, how that can damage equipment. We're going to get into personal safety, proper lifting techniques. I know it doesn't seem like you should be worrying about that in IT, but some computer equipment gets really heavy. If anybody has ever had to lift a power supply from a server rack, those things weigh about 50 to 60 pounds. They're no fun. And you have to be gentle with them. So it's not like you can just sling them around. So proper lifting procedures are a thing. If you have the ability to use a cart, you use a cart. You know, keep things close to your center of, like close to your body, so your center of gravity is lower. Things like that. Appropriate controls, addressing prohibited content. as well as privacy and licensing policies, communication techniques, and professionalism. We are still working on that in this classroom. Apologies along the way. All right. Safety procedures. When discussing safety issues with regards to PCs, there are 5 general areas that we want to talk about. 1, electrostatic discharge, which I'm sure we all remember from the early portions of this course where we were talking about what are the ways we can prevent against ESD. We should all be shouting this at this point.
A mat.
ESD mat, there's one.
The wrist strap.
ESD bracelet.
Don't work on carpet.
Well, yeah, don't, try not to work on carpet. Gloves.
There we go, gloves. Good day.
ESD gloves. If I'm transporting components, what am I transporting it in?
Antistatic bags.
Anti-static bags. I like how Susan brought up grounding bars for your servers because that's important too. So, electrostatic discharge, electromagnetic interference. Speakers have magnets. If you work in any kind of manufacturing, that becomes an issue. So, EMI, or electromagnetic interference. Natural elements, heat, cold, humidity. All of these play a factor. Computers, much like us, have a comfort range, and theirs is just slightly lower than ours on average. I think the warmest they like to get is like mid 70s or something like that, or high 70s. But their actual optimal range is somewhere in the mid to low 60s. Electrical fire safety and cable management. Many people don't think about cable management with regard to personal safety, but if you are poor on cable management, you can create trip hazards. Electronics devices can get snagged and pulled off of shelves, injuring people, damaging equipment, things like that. So cable management is a good thing. Plus, it just looks better when you have good cable management. You don't want somebody walking into your server room and it looking like a spaghetti bowl where it's just everything is going everywhere and it just looks terrible. So ESD, one of the most dangerous risks to the computers themselves. So not only does ESD have the potential to damage components, but it can also injure at higher levels. Like we talked about earlier, the lowest static voltage that people can tend to feel is around 3,000 volts. Does anybody remember? Well, it says 80, but I always read 100. 100, it takes as little as 100 volts to damage a component. So well below the range that you could even feel. And when you see a spark, like if you're going to touch a doorknob and it's middle of winter and you're wearing those big wool socks and shuffling your feet, you go to touch that doorknob and you see a little spark, that's at least 10,000 volts. So well above what can damage or catastrophically cause a component to fail. So when we are storing or transporting any computer components, anti-static bags, big ones. They have the grayish color or the grayish blue or the pinkish color. Anytime you're storing them or moving them, these are the bags you want to keep them in. If you receive components or you install components, keep a few of these bags in your toolbox. If you have a networking or IT toolbox, keep a few bags in there just to have on hand. It's handy to have one every now and again. one of the worst things you can have around your components, especially for shipping and stuff like that, if they're not in these electrostatic bags, there's styrofoam peanuts. Those are terrible. Have you ever tried to clean those things up and they're like clinging and sticking to everything? It's electrostatic. So those can fry components in like no time flat. So please don't have those in your area. Like if you've unpacked your stuff, clean all the peanuts up before you even open up any of your components. It's bad news. All right, moving along. ESD straps, as we talked about, has a little metal button on the inside where this wire is hooked up, creates a grounding to your skin. You would hook this up to the frame of the computer in order to create a neutral charge in between you and the device you're working on so that you won't have any discharges while working inside the computer. You should have at bare minimum one of these on before you ever reach your hands into a computer. Are there instances where you hear people and they've worked in computers thousands of times and never had a component go bad or get shocked or any of that kind of fun stuff? Yes. But it also comes down to it's not worth the risk. You don't want to be working on a really expensive piece of machinery and have something as simple as a tiny shock fry components in it. And then have to explain to your boss why it happened. Oh, well, it was because I was ignoring proper safety procedures. So ESD straps. Yes, Julian.
So I just want to share something that the other day I was talking to a person that is an IT person for a big company, and we were talking about this grounding yourself using ESD mats and wrist wraps or whatever you call them. And he's like, well, this is just for the exam. He's like, it's like driving. It's like when you're driving, when you go to take the license test, they tell you you gotta put your hands on 9 and 11 o'clock and blah blah blah.
It's 10 and 2, man.
Is that how you drive it? Say it again.
It's 10 and 2.
10 and 2. Well,
yeah,
I don't remember.
10 o'clock, 2 o'clock. You're like 9 and 11. That's like.
But I just forgot. So, anyways, he's like,
You're always like ready for a hard right turn, man. You're just like hanging out there, and you're just.
I didn't remember. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
And he's like, "Do you drive it like that?" And I was like, "No, not really. I drive with one hand, really." And he's like, "Yeah, that's exactly what happens with this. I mean, you're not you can use them, and you're supposed to use them, but it's not really necessary." So how true is that?
Again, it depends, because like I had one of my close friends growing up actually got into a company that did repairs on MRIs. Like the company he worked for programmed and repaired MRI machines, and he flew all over the country doing this stuff. And especially in the northern hospitals around wintertime, it was constant to see computer components getting damaged because of ESD. And he walked in and he's like, "Do you guys have a problem with?" You talk to their IT department. He's like, "Do you have a problem with ESD?" He's like, "Oh no, we never have a problem with that." And he's like, "Really? I've been in this hospital like for 10 minutes. I've been shocked like 20 times. Are you sure you don't have a problem with it?" And you go and for sure you test the components. The components are fried. So it depends.
I guess just to avoid anything, just wear it.
So absolutely for the exam, but it's one of those things, like have I reached into computers and worked on them without an ESD strap on? Yes. I'm not going to lie. I've done it. Have I done it since, passing my A+? Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I've done it, but as a general rule, yes, especially for the exam, ESD bracelets, grounding, some form of grounding needs to be done. I have grounding mats that I use when I work now because I find the grounding mats much easier than using the ESD straps. So there are precautions being taken. I don't work on carpet. My house has relatively low humidity from being in Florida and having the AC running, for long periods of time. So that lowers the humidity to about 50%. So I don't have to worry about it as much. Wintertime, I'm a little more cautious than I am in summer. So it depends on the environment, honestly.
Thank you.
And interestingly, if you take any tactical driving courses, they actually tell you to hold your hands at, it's like 4 and 7. Down at the bottom, 4 and 7, because it allows you faster reaction time. So there's your useless piece of knowledge for the day. Yes, Joseph.
It was just a piece of advice. You know, when I was learning to drive, there were a lot of rules about the road. And my first time sitting behind the steering, it was kind of overwhelming to learn all these rules and still go faster. But I resolved not to, you know, break the rules, even if I have to go slower for the time being until I got used to it. And once I got used to it and I started getting faster, then I realized why it was important that I follow all those rules, because I really didn't get into trouble and I always felt safe. So it's important to know that these are the rules that govern us. And sometimes we may not want to follow them, or it may not be too necessary, but we can determine that as we go. But for now, it will be hard for someone to tell you it's not necessary.
So use the proper safety precautions, especially at first, so that you can get into good rituals and routines. Thank you, Joseph. Also, mental note, Joseph drives really fast, apparently. Yes, Lorraine.
The other side of the spectrum in response to what the IT person that Halim was talking to. When I worked on when I did imaging, our equipment averaged between $1.5 million to $3 million. And there's usually a minimum of 5 computers in each system. And I can assure you that whenever somebody came from Philips or one of the companies that manufacture the equipment, not only did they use wrist straps and mats, but they left them with me in case I had a situation where they troubleshot remotely, and I had to do the same thing. So I can tell you that it really is used in the field, and I hope it's not just because we're talking about millions of dollars of equipment versus a network of less expensive computers, but
I think that has a lot to do with it, Lauren, because remember, I was just talking about MRIs, which MRIs are really expensive. So if you're talking about a $300 to $500 desktop versus a $5 to $10 million, imaging machine, I imagine the precautions that somebody would take not to damage components would be significantly different.
But interestingly, on that same note, because there's so many computers, pieces of hardware that support the actual imaging technology, I had a problem once where a GE tech came out and he had to literally put in a new component, and he fried it because he didn't do that. And not only did he really got in a lot of trouble.
Okay.
So I heard him talking to GE when he had to his manager. What happened? Because he had to have them send a new piece, a new tower.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, that still puts it in the it depends. So you're going to take the cues a lot from the techs you're working with and the type of stuff you're working on. But for the purposes of the test, we never, ever, 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 ever even look at a computer without strapping on that wrist strap. Heck, even if you're going to go down and you're just going to type on it, go ahead and clip onto the frame. Just be safe. So, yeah, we do need to pay attention to safety is a big component of the exam, but in the field, take your lead from your supervisors at first. All right, so ESD mats are another one. These are pretty handy. I think Avery just got his first one. He was excited. He was showing off all of his new IT gear over the Christmas break because he was doing some repairs on multiple computers for someone. So he was extremely happy about it. Next, proper handling, self-grounding. Grounding is the electrical term for providing a path for an electrical charge to flow to return to the earth. Electricity follows the path of least resistance. So we want to create a path that is easy for it to flow through that does not go through components. Kind of like lightning. Like when lightning strikes a car, people think it's the rubber and the tires that actually save you, when it's the frame around the car carries the charge around you, and the frame is what saves you, not the tires. So it's the path of least resistance. All right. Make sure the computer is turned off but plugged in to self-ground. Although this is kind of contradictory because we say before you open up a computer to get in, what do? You unplug it. So there is that. Touch an exposed part of the metal case to drain the electrical charge from you. You can do that, especially with tools and stuff like that. If you're using any kind of metal tools, tap them on the frame once or twice before you reach in and use them inside the computer, just to dispel any charge before you actually get close to a component. So the other thing also happens when you're handing a component from you to a coworker. Before you hand them the component, reach out, touch their arm, or some part of shoulder, arm, what have you, and then hand them the component. Don't allow the component be the first point of contact between the two of you, because if a charge must be dispelled, it will go through the component, which is what can damage it. So there you go. Self-grounding. All right. Electromagnetic interference, or EMI, also known as radio frequency interference, or RFI. And this essentially is a magnetic field that can interfere with electronics. It's not nearly as dangerous as ESD, but can cause permanent damage to some components or erase drives or storage devices. Like we talked about yesterday, what is one of the destruction methods you can use on a hard drive? Electromagnetic degaussing. So the magnets themselves can erase the drives. You can prevent EMI by keeping magnets away from your computer equipment. Avoid placing cordless phones close to SOHO routers or wireless access points. And strong distinction between cordless and cell phone. Cordless is a normal phone that operates without a cord in your house. People remember these, back when we actually had phones in our homes. They operate off the 2.4 gigahertz bandwidth, so they will interfere with some of your routers and things like that. And that falls under the EMI range. Also, microwaves. You turn on a microwave, it can massively disrupt Wi-Fi settings, especially if it's in between you and the access point. You may come across a question where it says customer is complaining that every day around midday, they start having internet connectivity issues. And then later in the afternoon, it cleans up. It's because everybody in the office is going into the lunchroom and turning on the microwave, heating up their lunches, and that's affecting the wireless access in the office. So paying attention to things that are going on when these things are happening is a key component to troubleshooting. All right, natural elements. So computers always should be in cool environments and away from direct sunlight and or water sources, because water and electronics don't typically go together. I know we showed you a computer in a fish tank, but remember that was mineral oil, not water. I don't know. I think they have some electronic fish, Mark, I'm just saying. So computers like to maintain a cool environment, and they like to be dirt and debris free, which is why opening them up on occasion, cleaning them out, can help the computers continue to cool properly, maintain good connectivity, things like that. I was in a cohort with a guy who talked about opening up computers with somebody who had a lot of cats, and there was so much cat hair inside the computer. The cat, when he opened it up, it looked like a pillow. It was just so packed with cat hair. And rather than clean that out in his house, he quite literally took it out, laid it on his driveway, and got a leaf blower and blew the computer out at that point. Though I would not recommend doing that, that actually did work for him. But yeah, keeping the computer clear of dust and debris can help it continue to function and operate properly. So next few slides, we're going to be talking about maintaining the environment and tools to clean it. Temperature range. Average temperature range should be between somewhere 68 to 71. I think human comfort is somewhere between 72 to 78. That's where we're most comfortable. And we want to maintain a humidity around 50%. What happens when the humidity gets too low? All at once. Static. Here we go. What happens if it gets too high? High humidity. Condensation on equipment. Excellent. And that leads to what? Yes. Condensation is moisture.
Water onto the system.
Well, yeah, and that can be bad. It could cause a short. But if you have just a tiny bit of like water, what happens when you have water on metal?
Erosion.
Oxidation, rust, all those nasty things that can degrade our equipment so it does not function properly. Did you know vinegar was a good way to remove rust? Like if you have a remote control and you left the batteries in too long, the batteries leaked and it corroded in there, you get a little bit of white vinegar on a Q-tip and you can clean all the rust out of there, and then it works wonderfully. So
yeah.
pro tip with electronic devices. What's that, DW?
Yeah, vinegar for like when screws rust and and they're they don't work as well. You can dip them with vinegar overnight, come back, wash them out.
There you go. Pro tip. Cocoa, I had not heard of that. Miaza, I had not heard of that one.
Does she mean Cocoa or Coca-Cola?
Oh, Coca-Cola. Yes, Coca-Cola. Scary thing is if you look at all the uses for Coca-Cola, you may never ever drink one again.
I don't. That's why I drink water.
That needs to be a conversation. That needs to be a conversation.
We'll get into that one a little bit later. All right. So humidity leads to moisture. High humidity leads to moisture. Condensation eventually leads to oxidation and rust. Bad stuff. Then you get to low humidity, high amount of static electricity in the air, increases your risk for ESD, which can damage components. Ventilation. So rounding out the temperature humidity is ventilation. Make sure the air is clean, not full of dust and debris. Circulate around the computer and equipment to keep it cool and functioning properly. Typically, cold air goes in the front, hot air goes out the back. In server rooms, they do things called hot and cold aisles, where they always have the fronts facing each other and the backs facing from each other, so they can be more efficient with the air circulation. All the hot air is being blown into one section where it can be drawn into the AC unit, and then cold air is pumped out into the cold aisles so that it can be drawn into the machines again. So paying attention to the ventilation of your computer so that it can help keep them cool. All right. Next, tools that we can use to clean out our computers. Most common one you use to clean out dust and debris from keyboard components, because, you know, why? But people love to eat while working on their computers. It just allows so much nasty stuff to get down into the keyboards. But compressed air, one of the least expensive ways to actually clean it out. Relatively inexpensive to pick up, and you can use this to blow dust and debris out of a computer. But remember, we don't use them on printers because you would blow the debris further into the printer, and that's bad. So compressed air, no good on printers, pretty good on computers. Vacuums. Another way is to suck that dust and debris out, but you can't just use a regular shop vac. They actually have specialized vacuums that will not allow for ESD discharges that you can use on a computer, and it is safe to use as well. So if you're going to use a vacuum, make sure it is a specialized electronic vacuum that can do that. And then they have another specialty vacuum for laser printers that has magnets on it to help suck up toner. We're not going to go into those excuses, Jessica. We're just going to say, as a general rule, we don't do that. All right. Electrical and fire safety. Oh my goodness, it came back up again. A, B, and C class fire extinguishers. You thought you could forget about it after 1001? No, no, no. It comes up again. Class A, wood and paper. Basically, it is a metal tin with a pump on it. Usually has water in it. Class B, flammable liquids like oil, kerosene, gas, things like that. And C gets into electrical fires. C is typically the one you would find around your office, although they do have multi-rating ones now that you would typically see in a home, office, or pretty much anywhere at this point. They are ABC rated. All right. Cable management. Yes, it's time consuming to tie up your cables and make them look pretty. But they have devices that make it easier. They have ways to kind of, organize things into nice, neat groups. If you see the guys who wire up these big data centers, it is crazy how they keep all that stuff straight, and it looks so nice and neat when everything is run. All comes down to cable management. Over time, you become faster at doing these organizations, and it works a lot easier. There's a natural organization to it. They have tools to help bind the cables together. They have channels and bridges that they can run these cables over. And it makes it a lot safer area to work. It looks a lot neater and, more professional all around. So any exposed cables should be routed to some form of covering. Please don't ever run cables along the floor. If there is no other alternative and it must be run on the floor, they do have like rubber channels that you can put along the floor that will protect the cable and also work to prevent any kind of trip hazard. Please don't ever run a cable and then duct tape it to the ground. That doesn't work. It leaves the cable exposed. People are going to roll over it with carts and chairs and step on it, all that kind of fun stuff. And eventually it's just going to destroy the cable. So that is hands down poor cable management, just to tape a cable down to the floor. They actually have channels for it that run good. And that should only be a temporary measure until you can run them overhead or along baseboards or through walls. So take a little extra time, make it look more professional. They may not say, "Ooh, your cable management is awesome," but they will say, "Man, that is terrible looking if you don't have good cable management." So it's kind of one of those things, unfortunately, you're rarely praised for, but if you don't do it, they definitely will say something. So next, get into personal safety. I love how this thing contradicts itself in the middle of a technical session. To ground yourself, leave the computer plugged in. For personal safety, unplug it. Sorry. So safety measure we're going to be getting into: disconnect power before repairing a PC. Anytime before you reach inside of a PC, I would highly suggest just disconnecting it. In the US, we operate off of 110, which, I'll tell you, if you hit a hot 110 wire, it's unpleasant. In Europe, they operate off of 220, and if you hit a 220 live wire, it burns. So it's extremely unpleasant. So just to avoid it, do that. What's the other thing we do after we unplug it? What do we do after that? We turn it off, we unplug it. What else do we do? Joseph?
When we work as a team in IT, sometimes you have somebody telling you, "Oh, you don't have to plug that. We've been here working on it for years," and you know that it's a safety rules. Mm-hmm. What will you do in such instant? All of the other colleagues you met on the job are saying that's how they've been living with. That's what they've been doing. And now you went there with a new rule. You know it's safe. They know it's safe, but they don't want to do it.
Well, I mean, this will depend on if you're just a team member or the supervisor. So if you're just a team member, I would just basically say, like, look, for my peace of mind, I'm just unplugging it. That's for my personal peace of mind. I don't like getting shocked. Now, if you're the supervisor and you have team members that work under you that are refusing to do that, that's a whole different category. So that's something that would need to be addressed at that point.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I would basically tell my team members, if they said, like, "Yeah, you don't need to unplug it, you don't need to do that," I'm like, "Look, man, I'm just doing it for my own peace of mind. You do you. I've been electrocuted. I don't want that to happen again." So, yes, hold the power for 5 seconds to do what, Susan?
To discharge.
Yes, go on.
Security. No.
Perfect.
Sorry. To discharge the power. I don't know.
These little things look like batteries.
Oh, the capacitor?
There you go. To discharge the residual power in the capacitors. Very good. Thank you, Susan. Security. I'm going to remember that. That's going to be great. So, yeah, disconnecting power before repairing a PC. If you're a person who likes to wear jewelry, or you wear any kind of jewelry, me personally, I'm not a fan of jewelry. I don't wear any. But yeah, before you work on anything electrical or mechanical, always remove your jewelry, your rings. I've seen instances of people who didn't, more on the mechanical side and high voltage side. After that, I refuse to wear any jewelry. So after seeing the results of stuff with some of that stuff, that was when I was a teenager. I was like, nope, never. So yeah, before you reach into a computer, rings off, necklaces, anything that can be snagged or touch multiple components can cause a grounding between two components, can damage those components. Yes, DW.
I met someone who had a C-section, and their doctor forgot to take their wedding band while they were performing the C-section, and she ended up having the wedding band inside of her.
Oh my goodness! Really?
Yeah, and then yeah.
Did she get to keep it?
it was in her for a long time until the doctor finally realized what had happened. But then they had to schedule another surgery to go in and get it out.
I hope that one was pro bono.
Well, that one was pro bono, but the crazy part is that because it didn't really cause her anything other than another surgery, she wasn't even able to sue. Like it was extremely hard for her to.
Well, I would say, the fact that I have to undergo another surgery and I have to have downtime from my job, which is going to cause me lost wages, because you messed up. I mean, there's probably a way to talk about that. That is messed up, though.
Yeah, I was crazy and shocked. This was like when I used to wait tables, so sometimes you just start up random conversations and that came up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, take your jewelry off in a professional environment.
Yes, absolutely. Don't ever Google degloving a finger. That is a it happens to mechanics when they don't take their wedding rings off. That's why they make those rubber or neoprene wedding rings now that you see them, like they advertise them for gyms and stuff like that. But yeah. All right, so removing jewelry, for personal safety and also safety of the components, lifting techniques. We can talk about that, and appropriate tools for the appropriate job. My brother is fond of saying every tool is a hammer as long as it's properly applied. That does not work for IT tools. Please use the appropriate tools for the appropriate job. All right, never attempt to remove a case, open it, reach inside of it, anything if it is plugged in. It's just not worth it. You should unplug it, before you work on it. This part where it says using a voltmeter just to make sure the current is off, that's a little extreme. But, I would say at least go through the safety of unplugging it, pressing and holding the power button just to kind of be safe. I don't know if I'd break out my multimeter just to test things out just to be sure before I reached in there. But if you really hate ever receiving a shock, then yeah, there you go. Removing jewelry. Gold and other metals are great conductors for electrical currents. Why they use them on a lot of microchips and connectors and all that kind of fun stuff. So the last thing you want is the gold from a chain around your neck or on your ring or something like that fall against the capacitor and send that fun charge that it's been holding up and saving through your body, because that would be extremely unpleasant. And while not everything is metallic, it also can be a snagging hazard. So we've already talked about that just a few minutes ago. All right, lifting techniques. You may have heard it a million times, and that's because if you have ever injured your back, it is never the same. Once you injure it the first time, it is never the same. Always lift with your legs. Keep the item close to your body. Maintain the natural curve of your back and spine while you're lifting. It feels awkward the first few times you do it, but when you get into that habit, it just makes sense. Don't bend over at the hips to pick things up. Bend at the knees. Keep your body vertical. Careful not to twist, because you can pull muscles very easily. Speaking from somebody with experience. Keeping the weight close to your center line. Keep objects close to your body as possible and at waist level, if at all possible. Now, use carts whenever you can to move equipment. It's just safer. And you push it instead of pulling it for the most part. I know sometimes when you get to doorways and stuff and they have the little sills that go up, and it just, without ramming it against the sill, you're not going to get over it. You have to get over there and kind of lift it up over the sill. That's fine for a few feet. But for the most part, push instead of pull. Safety goggles. If you're breaking, it seems silly, but if you're breaking out compressed air to blow dust and debris out of keyboards and all that fun stuff. You don't want to get somebody's 3-month-old Cheeto dust in your eyes. I'm just telling you. Put on a quick, cheap pair of safety goggles, blow it out. Heck, after hearing that, you're probably going to want to use a full-blown respirator when you're blowing out somebody's keyboards or whatever. But, just think about that. Somebody ate Cheetos 3 months ago. Now their keyboard's not working right, and you got to blow it out. So you need to, use compressed air, safety goggles. You don't want it getting in your eyes. So there you go. Air filter or mask. If you're going into a drop ceiling, if you have to go up, like climb up into a drop ceiling to run cable, if you have to go into a crawl space, an attic, storerooms, basements, things like that, air filtration mask. So there's all sorts of just terrible stuff, dust, mold, all that kind of fun stuff. If you're a person who has asthma, like I do, you're very conscious of this stuff. Older buildings, you have to worry about asbestos and things like that. It's just not worth playing around with. Throw on a quick air filter mask, save yourself a lot of heartache down the line. Yes, Julian.
So obviously we all know that we're supposed to use plenum cables for drop ceilings and all that.
Yes.
Would there be, in our career as we go on, would there be places where we find that plenum cables are not used for drop ceilings and stuff?
Yes, people who are trying to save money.
Okay.
It's one of those things where it's not required. It's just highly recommended. So some people are like, you know what? It's too expensive. The IT guys find it very annoying having to work with the foil covered wires. The other stuff's just cheaper. We'll go ahead and run the other stuff. So yeah. Any kind of health and safety codes, you have the potential of running up against it and it not being, fully looked into. OSHA requirements. Any restaurant you go into probably has upwards of 100 OSHA violations at any given time. It's real difficult for anybody to know all the rules and regulations that are required, so they tend to stick to the big ones. Also, some of them are so outdated, there's nobody who really understands why they're being enforced. Like the toilet seats. Did I tell you guys about this? Like the toilet seats that have a little gap in the front. Did I tell you guys about that?
Yeah, about the PP splinters.
Yeah. So it's still enforced, even though there's no point to it. So, it's just kind of one of those things, like nobody knows all the regulations, or most people don't know all the regulations. So there's typically a lot of violations in any given building. We kind of do the best we can with the materials we have or the budget we have. Yes, DW.
No, I was just building on Julian's question as far as the plenum. When for new buildings, especially buildings like I'm thinking about the Freedom Tower that was recently built in New York City about 8 years ago. When the fire marshals come in, don't they have to? Isn't that part of the fire code? They have to see those plenum wirings, and if it's not, don't they make them redo it?
New construction, I would say yes, but when I'm talking, kind of what I'm talking about with Julian's question is small businesses that are just kind of redoing their own stuff in their office. Are there situations you're going to come across that? Oh yeah, especially small offices, home offices, and stuff like that. They may not run plenum. When I bought cable to run throughout my house, I didn't buy plenum.
So isn't plenum supposed to be run when it's sharing the HVAC system? So you could run stuff through the ceiling, but if the HVAC doesn't run through the ceiling, then you're good, right? Or it's not a fire. It's not a fire code violation.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And that's like a little hot trick that some people can use, like if you're in an apartment, to be able to run data lines in an apartment. You can run them through the HVAC system, and then have them just come out at the vents, and then you run them down run them down the corners of your walls, and you can just put conduit to and you can paint the conduit to look like your wall paint. But in order to run actual wires through an apartment, you can actually just use the tunnels that have already been made with the HVAC systems. So some people have done it. So, but again, that would be in apartments. Me personally, I use Ethernet over power. But I've never tested that in an apartment, so I don't know how it would work there. All right. Oh, wow. Yeah, Karen, we have the big wood ones here in Jacksonville, the wood rats. Oof. All right, safety goggles, air filtration. Next. Appropriate control, safety documentation, and handling toxic components, and managing power. All right, so safety documentation for every kind of chemical you have in an office that has a potential to cause harm. You must have an MSDS sheet on it. So material safety data sheets. It gives you a laundry list of the components that are involved, the boiling points of it, potential hazards, health risks, melting points, all that fun stuff. It does not tell you the freezing point because it's typically not going to be in an environment where people are going to be working on a regular basis. We don't work in an environment where things are typically freezing. We're typically on the other end of that spectrum. But so the MSDS has to do with any chemical. So if you have people who keep medications on hand, if you have people that keep hand lotions, if you have asthmatics, they keep inhalers. If you keep shampoos or anything, hand sanitizer, every single one of these things, you have to have an MSDS on file. So bear that in mind. And the one thing it does not, list, freezing point, melting point, boiling point, health risks, like, is it an eye irritant? Is it, a breathing hazard, something along those lines? All that stuff is listed on these MSDS sheets. So if it's spilled, are there special requirements for cleaning up these items? Yes, Jessica.
I just wanted to confirm, so I can imagine when the pandemic hit, there were a lot of updates, or should have been updates to the MSDS. Because
not necessarily. Granted, a lot of these companies will sit there with hand sanitizer, they may say it does not kill COVID, because not all hand sanitizers are created equal.
But that wasn't typically a routine office supply, at least not.
It wasn't the offices I worked in. They always had hand sanitizer around, hand lotion, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, you've been living luxuriously.
No, I just work with hypochondriacs.
That's good. I was always the hypochondriac.
Everybody
came to me for those things.
And what was bad is my wife is a horrible hypochondriac, and she was paranoid before this happened. So when this went, she was in her element. She was like, I've been preparing for this my whole life.
I was like, you see, so I told you guys, I got my training. I felt very there's not much of my life that has to change. So yeah.
And she's a teacher. So she literally works. She works at elementary school. So she literally works in a petri dish.
Yeah, and cesspool of germs.
Under the sink in her classroom, she had gallons of hand sanitizer. And as soon as this started to go down, I was like, you need to bring all that stuff home because that's going to get stolen so fast.
Yep, it became that serious.
So she puts it all in milk crates. It was 5 milk crates worth of hand sanitizer she brings to the house.
I love it. But okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Jessica, Kelly's been spoiled. The rest of us are lucky we have like paper towels in the bathroom.
Right? Like if the toilet paper is properly stocked, like I'm from Miami, Florida, so you know it's a hard knock life out here. You get what you get.
You get the Scott's 1-ply, you know.
If that.
If that.
At my second job ever, I used to carry in my backpack just sanitary wipes, just because you never knew if we were gonna have some at work or not. Like we were gonna have, you know, and yeah, we were neglected very much.
I worked with truckers, you know, so I was in logistics. I worked in transportation, like so I worked in warehouses and stuff like that, and with truck drivers and forklifts, all that fun stuff. So that's like most of my office work history, like big quotes office. You know, it was like I literally was in a temporary building inside of a warehouse in New Jersey where the bay door didn't work next to us. So like in wintertime, there was like no cover. Like we were literally in cold suits in our offices, you know, trying to get everything put together. So no fun. All right. Nice sidebar. All right. Handling toxic components. So many of the components that are inside a computer should not simply just be thrown in the trash. You know, if a computer stops working or whatever stops working, you know, yes, try to get it to a recycle center if possible, because there's, you know, there are precious metals inside a computer. There are toxic components inside a computer, and all that can be taken care of at a recycling center. We have a big electronics recycling center here in Jacksonville. Stuff that can be refurbished and reused. You can go there and buy computers pretty cheap. I think you heard me mention that in the first week. If you're like a tactile person that wants a hands-on experience, you can go to a electronics recycle center, buy a tower for, you know, $20 or less, and use that to kind of work on and practice taking a computer apart, putting it back together. It's one way to go about it. So these kind of things, you know, you want to take them to a recycle center. Obviously, you want to make sure the data that's on those machines is thoroughly destroyed before you do that, which is why me personally, I remove hard drives and then I'll recycle the rest. But certain things have a lot of toxic components in them. CRT monitors are a big one. They have mercury and all kinds of nasty stuff inside them. So you would want to take those in to be recycled so long as they are not broken. I mean, like the screens shatter or something like that. If that's the case, that actually is a hazmat cleanup. So like there are hazardous procedures that have to be used for proper cleanup and disposal at that point. If they're not broken, if they're still in good condition, then you would take them to a recycle center to have them properly disposed of or reused. Batteries are a big one. They contain a lot of components that should not be just essentially thrown into landfills. One of the worst ones are those little button batteries. Those are like, you never throw those just in the trash. They are terrible for the environment. They have rare earth minerals, lead, cadmium, lithium, alkaline manganese, mercury, all kinds of fun stuff that you definitely don't want in your drinking water.
Kelly, what do you mean by the button battery? Can you explain that a little bit more?
The little flat batteries that you put in watches, car remotes, hearing aids.
Are you serious?
Yeah, those are some of the worst for the environment. You never throw those away. You always recycle those.
Wow, okay.
I'm hearing the guilt in your voice right now.
I'll tell my friend, Kelly. I'll tell my friend.
It's like, I could just hear man, I've been doing that all my life.
Does that include CMOS batteries?
Yes, it does. So, Joseph.
Yes, I have never been at a recycling facility, and I'm not sure what really happens there.
For electronics?
Anything, just to make me understand what really happens there. But since we're talking about electronics, yes, let's take the button batteries you just talked about.
Mm-hmm. Well, what some of them may do is they will break open those batteries. They will use several different types of like chemicals, like acids and stuff like that, to kind of separate the materials. If they can be reused, they'll be reused. If not, they have to find a way to dispose of them properly. There's a thing called battery sludge, which is like really nasty stuff. Like typically when you would see like in the 80s movies where they talked about them dumping barrels of toxic chemicals into the oceans and stuff like that. Like the A-Team was always big on that. Typically what they're throwing away is the battery sludge, because there is proper disposal methods, like places where they can dispose of this stuff, you know, because I think it has to go X amount of years before it's safe to go back into the environment, or it's never safe. There are things called Superfund sites, which are toxic sites that you're not allowed to live on. And they supposedly have funds to clean up these sites. They started tracking them back in the 60s. I don't think a single one has ever been cleaned up, but we've added a couple thousand of them. So if you really want to terrify yourself, look up Superfund sites where you live. I looked them up here in Jacksonville. I think we have like 3 here in Jacksonville. So yeah, to be aware of that kind of stuff. So they try to separate the materials out the best they can, dispose of the stuff that cannot be reused, and reuse what they can. Like we said, on computers, there's lots of precious metals in there. There's platinum, there's gold and stuff like that. There's guys on YouTube that literally make their living taking computers and stripping the precious metals out of them, and they live off of that stuff. Long-term, hazardous to your health because there's a lot of chemical processes involved. And if you're not properly ventilating and stuff like that, it can really mess you up. But, you know, so they'll get the precious metals out of them. At electronics recycle centers, they may find components that just need a little bit of refurbishing, and then they can be reused and resold to do a discount. So they'll do that. So it's just, there's a lot of stuff that goes on at these centers. But the primary thing is making sure it's not just getting thrown into a landfill where these nasty chemicals can like leach into our groundwater. That's the big thing. All right. See here. Toner. Most of these, you know, the components in them can easily be reused. The components inside are also not necessarily the best for the environment. Thankfully, most times when you buy toner, they come with a box to mail it back in, and most manufacturers will already prepay the postage. Like if you're on a subscription service, they'll prepay the postage for you to mail it right back to them, and they can refurbish it, reuse it, send it back out. So it makes sense for toner to go ahead and be recycled. CRT monitors, again, can't be thrown in the trash. They have stuff like arsenic, beryllium, cadmium, chromium, mercury, nickel, zinc, all the kind of minerals that just not great for the environment. So again, these contents are under pressure in the CRT monitors. And if something breaks, like the glass or whatever, they can be forced out, cause injury. And again, at that point, if they're broken, recycle centers won't accept it. It requires hazardous cleanup and disposal. They usually have phone numbers you would call. The people would come out and take care of it, all that kind of fun stuff. All right. Next. Maintaining power. Understand the difference between a blackout, a brownout, sag, spike, and a surge. So blackout, complete power failure. Everything goes dark. Brownouts, there's a significant drop in voltage that lasts more than a few minutes. I think during the fires in California, they were having issues with the power grid, and they talked about rolling brownouts and blackouts. This is what they're talking about when they're saying brownout, where there's a drop in the voltage. Some components may not be able to work properly over a long period of time. And then blackout, obviously they can't work at all. Sag is a short-term drop in voltage. You know, if it lasts a long period of time, the sag becomes known as a brownout. Spike typically happens under 1 second. You may have experienced this where you see your lights get really bright and then they calm back down. This would be a increase in the voltage over the lines, and that can cause irreparable damage to your equipment, which is why we use surge protectors. Those power strips originally were surge protectors. Unfortunately, now not all power strips are surge protectors, so you have to be careful about that. And to protect against brownouts and blackouts, we use UPSs, which typically have built-in surge protectors in them. And then you have the surge, which is a long spike. When a spike lasts longer than a few seconds, it is called a surge. And it is a less intense power increase, but it can also damage your equipment. So spikes become surges, sags become brownouts. When you lose everything, it's a blackout. Questions, comments, concerns? All right. So battery backups, one of the most common being a UPS. Those can be just a simple battery pack that you have at the foot, at your desk that you would plug into. And they can go all the way up to being big batteries that they plug into server racks and things like that to keep your servers up and running. They would apply or allow power to run for short periods of time after the loss of power from the from your main input. And it gives time for the backup generators to kick on, because generators typically kick on once the power loss has occurred. Unfortunately, if the power drops off, everything gets cut off, the damage kind of is done at that point. So you need a UPS to kind of bridge that gap between the generators coming on and the power being cut off, because it's an instantaneous thing. Once it feels that drop, it kicks in. Typically, they only last for a few minutes. So if you have one on at your house and you don't have a generator at your house, it may buy you enough time to go ahead and power everything off. Like you see all the lights go off in your house, you can start shutting everything down safely so it doesn't damage your computer. And it gives you, between, 5-10 minutes roughly of power when the power goes out. Surge suppressor keeps spikes from damaging your equipment. When the spike gets to be too much, it may trip your breakers. And that's when a breaker essentially just goes ahead and cuts off. Too much power is being drawn through it. You would have to go and reset your breaker. At that point, your UPS would turn on to kind of keep things going while you can power down or go reset your breaker. Incident response. Didn't know you guys were signing up for this, did you? IT. So, the extent to which a security event causes harm to your network largely depends on the speed and quality of your response to the incident. Typically, in large organizations, they should have a full-blown incident response manual in place and offline. Unfortunately, recently, a huge organization had their entire network crash, and they had been doing live fire exercises. They'd been practicing. They had the manuals and all that stuff to be able to handle the incident response, and they kept those manuals on the servers. They didn't have hard copies. So when everything crashed, they had no access to their incident response manuals. So make sure there are hard copies of your incident response manuals to make sure you know the steps that need to be taken in order to get things back up and running quickly. Or if there is legal issues, like, who do you contact first? Do we contact the police or the lawyers first? Depending on the incidents, they may tell you, in this type of incidents, you contact the lawyers. In this type of incidents, you contact the police, then the lawyers, or it may just be let your supervisor know. If you're the first responder, you have to identify the problem. You have to report it through the proper channels, letting your supervisor know, manager, HR, if they need to be involved. There is going to be a chain of command you need to communicate with. And then you also have to preserve the device and data that the incident occurred on. Don't turn it off. Because if you turn it off, that can change things. Some programs are set to erase itself if it's turned off. There's all kinds of things why you don't want to do it. You want to keep everything on and in the state it was in until the authorities have arrived to check it out. Start documenting things. And you have to set up chain of custody. Chain of custody is a setup where every hand that touches a piece of evidence must be documented. When you received it, what was done to it, who you handed it off to, and when. You should have chain of custody documents on file in case you have to use them. If that chain is ever broken, any evidence that the chain was broken on becomes unusable in court. It's called the fruit of the poisonous tree. So anything that touches that evidence is now considered unusable in court. So chain of custody is very important. Yes, Jessica.
I had to step away for just a second, but I got to review the slide. I'm just trying to confirm. Like it sounded pretty serious where you're like, you either got to call the lawyer, you may have to call the lawyer first before the police. What would happen? What type of, I guess, incident would cause this domino effect of this type of response of going through these protocols as far as first response documentation and the chain of custody?
Hearing about somebody throwing a button battery in the trash?
Hold on, are you like poking fun at me or I mean at my friend?
No, like if somebody was looking at illegal material on the computer, if somebody was performing espionage, like trying to send proprietary information from the company to an outside source, there's a lot of different things that can happen, and people do just unintelligent things on computers in full view for some odd reason. So if it happens to be,
next question. You said in full view, like how would, you know what I mean? Like how would we know?
You might get alerted on the servers, like, because
I was gonna say
this computer is accessing is trying to download illegal movies from the internet. Like that would be an instance. It could be your firewalls pick up, packets of data or formulas for products that you have, and they're trying to send it outside of the company unauthorized. So that's something where you would shut down their connections, isolate the computers. You would go, that person would be escorted out of the building, or maybe held by security until the police get there. So there may be scenarios where this occurs because you, like it or not, are part of the security apparatus for the company.
Okay, that's what I wanted to get. Okay, thank you.
Yep. And here's the scary part.
Oh, there's more?
Oh, there's always more. So basically, this comes down to illegal activities as well as espionage, where they're trying to sell company secrets or trade company secrets, something like that. And some of it could be just a local issue. If it has to do with encryption standards, like your company comes up with some pretty interesting encryption standards that are better than what are known. If you try to sell that to somebody in another country, then it becomes a felony. It starts to become really, really scary because there are certain devices that are not allowed to leave the country because of the encryption standards that they use, because then it would be sharing trade secrets with foreign intelligence. And also, like if you go over to Japan or some of these other countries and you buy certain devices, they'll tell you flat out, you cannot bring those back into the US, because then it would be like you sharing their secrets with us.
Mm-hmm. Because we could reverse the technology, basically.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly. So, countries tend to be pretty protective about the encryption standards that they use, things like that. So, it can escalate pretty quickly. So those would be scenarios where you might come across that. And where it gets worse is say you catch somebody doing something illegal and you turn a blind eye to it in IT. Eventually they get caught and they said, oh, so-and-so in IT heard about it. They didn't tell me it was wrong. You're now an accomplice in it. And you can be charged with an equal charge.
An equal charge.
Yes.
The more you know. Message received, Kelly. That's crazy. I mean, it makes sense because that's part of your job. So you got to.
Yes. Well, and if you allow the crime to continue.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. All right. First response, identify the problem. Part of identifying the problem involves identifying what policy or law prohibits such action. Some of the prohibited content generally falls within the following categories. Exploitation of people in any way, sexually, violently, so on. Promoting harassment of any person or group. Containing or promoting anything illegal or unauthorized with the company. This kind of bridges between what is a policy violation or what is a legal violation. So, we have to pay attention to those. Promoting racism, hatred, bigotry, or physical harm. Containing adult content involving nudity or sexual acts. Violating privacy rights, copyrights, contract rights, or defamation rights. Spreading viruses or malware throughout the system. Impersonating somebody else, also known as spoofing. Soliciting information from anyone younger than 18 and involving pyramid schemes, junk mail, chain letters, and spamming. So, depending on the rules of your company, there may be much more added to this. This is just a general list, but most of this tends to fall under legal issues rather than local policy issues. All right, so you're gonna report it through the proper channels. Once you have identified it or the activity, you must report it through the proper channels. Yes, Jerusalem.
Yeah, so usually I think right after you get hired, after drug test, I guess old days, you would get the code of conduct, ethics. They're normally like really pretty lengthy, aren't they? And then you go by that guideline because it's not the same everywhere, isn't it?
Well, I would say like the bulk of it is the same, but there is nuance with companies.
Right.
And yeah, you're right. It is pretty lengthy, and that's where it starts getting nasty. I mean, it's kind of shocking when you would look into this. And what was funny is like up until like the mid or the 2000s, you would have your code of conduct, your employee handbook, and then they would put the I do miss these days. They would put the non-disclosure or non-compete in the employee handbook, and then you would just sign the end of the employee handbook and would turn that in. Well, unfortunately, at the back last page of the handbook, man, they would put on there something that says, we can change any or all policies within this handbook with or without notice, and, and blah, 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 which from a legal standpoint basically means like if they can change it or adjust it legally, you're not bound to anything that is in that document, because if they can change it without notice, you can't be legally held to it. And the non-compete is also in there.
I think with that also, they always have a revised version of things when they redo them. And then it has in the bottom, it says revised in such and such date. So you can't say, oh, I didn't know. Because there is a revision you would get in the later days, whenever they change it. I've seen that before.
Yes, but before they would have that non-compete, non-disclosure in there, and then you couldn't be held to the non-compete, non-disclosure because of the statement they made at the end of the book. They finally wised up to that, unfortunately. And now that's a separate document. Sorry, I have a long history with non-compete, non-disclosures. It's part of how I ended up in IT. But yeah, they do usually give you that code of conduct book. They also give you a copy of the acceptable use policy and all that fun stuff, which they say what is allowed, what is not allowed on our systems. And many times they'll ask you to re-up or sign that acceptable use policy every single day when you log in. So when you're logging into the systems, they'll have a brief summary of the acceptable use policy, and you'll have to agree to it in order to be able to log into their system. So they keep reaffirming that so that it protects them. All right. So if the violation is one only of the company policy, it is usually the company's human resource department is the proper channel. You would notify your supervisor and then on to human resources at that point. If the violation is of the law, often you must contact legal authorities, notifying the appropriate internal resources as well. That's why you'd be like, legal team, HR, supervisor, cops. Next, if the violation is of a federal law and you only tell an internal resource, your HR manager, for example, it does not absolve you of the responsibility if that person does not continue to report to the authorities. So do not rely upon them to make that call unless you want to sit there while they make that call. Because if they catch wind of it, it's their buddy who's the one who caused the problem. They don't want to report their buddy. Later it blows up. It's still on you.
So how would you, I guess there's no other way to go through that process without sitting by so I'll just keep you company while you make that call, buddy. How would you confirm? Do you give them an hour or two, double back and be like, hey, did you put that call in? You know what I mean? I
don't know. Honestly, on that one, that's kind of a tough question. I mean, you may, if they say they're going to do it, right then, I would keep checking back with them. Have you done it? Have you done it? Have you done it? Can you please advise me the case number? Because I may unfortunately be involved in this, because they would be provided a case number. So, there's ways you can kind of let them know that you're not giving up on this. And then if, like a day or so, or like a day goes by or something like that, and they have not made that contact, depending on the severity, then
to go ahead and proceed on.
Yeah, then it might be on you to give that, to follow through with that, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
So, all right. So you have an obligation to preserve the content found until it is turned over to the appropriate authorities. Doing so may require commandeering anything from a flash drive up to a network server. Yes, DW.
Yeah, I was still kind of back on the, whether it's a company issue, a federal issue, a local law issue. What happens when it's like a company issue that also violates like federal or state laws, like
federal laws take precedence.
Yeah, but I'm saying you find out that higher ups in let's say you work for a financial institution and you find out that they're violating SEC rules and that your supervisor or higher management is involved in that. That in this country is so frowned upon to whistleblow and stuff like that. How do you manage that professionally without ruining your career at the same time?
Well, that's the tough part. I mean, it really is, because I wouldn't necessarily say whistleblowers are frowned upon on everyday society. I think the average person appreciates whistleblowers. I think it's the people that run these companies that don't.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Like when you go to another company and it's been in the news that hey, you whistleblew on this company secrets and stuff. Like how does that stop? How does that not ruin your career or your career trajectory?
Well, unfortunately, in cases like that, it may actually involve changing into a different field, but in IT, you can kind of get into almost anything. So you may be in the medical field, but you can switch over to the transportation field. It's one of those things where, within IT, you're extremely versatile, but it's one of those things, if something really bad is going on, or do you want to stand by while it's happening? I mean, you don't have to answer. It's more of a rhetorical question. I mean, but, if like the Madoff thing, the guy was scamming tons of retirees out of their pensions. And if you were the one who stumbled across it, would you want that to continue? Or it's one of those things where, the price may be worth it. And there may be organizations that will want to take you on just because you were brave enough to do that.
And then a second part to that would be when you know that there's, people higher up in the food chain that are involved, like, how do you know where to go to report that internally, or do you straight Like if you know that there are federal laws, you go straight into law enforcement.
If you come across something and you're fairly certain that it's the higher ups that are involved in it, then yeah, you probably want to go straight to law enforcement first. I mean, we're getting into like spy movie stuff, and it's very rare that something like this will actually occur. But yeah, I mean, if you have a strong inkling that they're being protected by officers of the company and all that stuff, then yeah, you want to go straight to law enforcement about it. So, but it's going to depend on the scenario. Interestingly enough, as a IT person or a system administrator, you may be privy to a lot of information that the average person wouldn't in a company. So it is possible you'll come across something like that, but it's kind of one of those, like, let your conscience be your guide for the most part. But understand that if it later on, if it comes out that it's known that you knew, you pay the price too.
Equally.
So one of those things. There's no easy answer on that one, DW, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was even thinking of like even sometimes simpler like that. Like there are a lot of employers who violate like federal like work regulations, right? Like maybe they don't pay overtime. You bring that up to them. You bring that up to the person, and like you go through all that. Like, but then because you brought that up, now you might be up for that promotion. You might not. You know what I mean?
I know.
It's not just one thing. And then typically typically those are long processes, and then also it might amount to nothing. They might get a slap on the wrist, or that violation might never come up. You know what I mean? It's it's like a lot of different things.
One of the things is if they're violating labor laws, depending on the labor law, you know, like if they're violating it and you notify them of that, and then they have kind of a negative response to that, yeah, start looking for another company to move to. If they continue to try to push the issue, because like I'll say, like Walmart was really bad about that back in the late 90s. I worked for them, and there was a lot of terrible stuff that would go on in the stores that, like, after I quit there, I didn't set foot in one for about 20 years. I refused to give them my money because of the way they treated their employees and the things that were going on. I refused to support it. I think since then I've been in one time, and it was because I was with somebody who wanted to go there. It's not because I went there, you know, but I refused to give them my money because I know what they do. So, I mean, it's one of those things. Like if you start seeing that stuff or you start experiencing it, start looking for look for your exit plan to go somewhere else. Because if it's an unethical company, me personally, I would not want my name associated with it. There's one thing that never, like the main thing you can control is your reputation. So, but yeah, it's not always, the answers aren't always easy. Unfortunately, the questions can get harder though. So it comes down to mostly just kind of doing the best we can. All right. So back to this. Preservation of data may require you commandeering devices, and it could be up to network servers. Until someone in the position of authority relieves you of the responsibility, you must preserve the data or device in the state in which you discovered it, meaning do not turn it off, do not turn it on if it's off. Leave it as is. You start to get into data forensics. If we go a little bit more than that, it's a little bit beyond this course. If you're ever unsure how to proceed, you should immediately contact your supervisor, unless it is your supervisor that's causing the problem. Then you would go to the next level up. Because knowing what to do when something is discovered is something that may not come naturally. It is a good idea to include the procedures you'll generally follow in the Incident Response Plan, IRP. and it should give you detailed steps of what you should do with any particular instances. If you are working for a small company and you're you may be the only IT person, you may have to wear many hats, you may actually have to design the incident response plan for your organization. Don't worry. This is one of those cases where you might be able to do a little bit of plagiarism. You look up somebody else's plans, adjust them a little bit to fit your company, throw it in there. You know, if you steal from one source, it's plagiarism. If you steal from many, it's research. I forgot who said it, but that was always a good one. So small companies, you may have to design the incident response plan. Larger companies typically have one in place. All right, documentation. Document everything that could be relevant to the situation. You may have to take pictures of things and hand those over. You may have forms that you have to fill out. So many companies, if they have an IRP in place, they have standard forms that you may fill out, and it may be initiating that chain of custody. So don't forget to ask critical questions of people involved in the incident. Try to look for vital clues. You're doing like preliminary stuff until the police arrive, and then you can kind of let them know what you have at that point. All right, chain of custody, removed materials should be secured and turned over to the property authorities. Depending on the situation, the materials may be held in a safe, locked location at the office, or they may need to be turned over to local authorities. Even if it's a company issue and it may just be a minor legal issue where it's like a minor espionage or somebody's embezzling money or something like that, you may hold the computers just for legal purposes. So it may be in a secured, locked room. They'll come in, they'll take forensic copies of the drives to be able to use in the legal case. But it will be very important to label and catalog everything as part of sealing, sorting, and storing the evidence. Don't worry, you don't have to be an expert on it, but if you do get into cybersecurity, they do talk a little bit more in detail on this. And it's not something where you won't have zero training on it before you would have to do something like this. All right, on to something a little less scary: privacy, licensing, and policies. So talking about managing software licenses, the different types of licenses you may occur, or working with personable identifiable information, or PII. All right, so operating systems, application software, all that kind of stuff, third-party stuff have licenses that you're purchasing to legally use the software. Think Microsoft for that, because they pretty much came up with that idea. It also requires that you accept the End User License Agreement, or EULA, whereby you agree to use the software as described in that agreement. It can get pretty detailed, what is allowed, what is not allowed, what are reasons by which they can revoke that software from you or shut it down. Because like we said, with mobile devices and all that stuff, you own the phone, not the software on it. You violate the license agreement of the provider of that software, they can turn it off on your phone. But you still have the phone because you own that. So music and movie files, on the other hand, are protected by digital rights management. So this is a system that maintains control over these files and ensures they are installed only on devices that belong to the person who purchased the file, with the end goal of being to prevent users from sharing and giving these away without paying for them. Oops, too far. Back up. All right, open source versus commercial license. Yeah, LimeWire was music sharing and movies, actually. It's multimedia sharing. All right, so open source software, as we talked about, like on the Android phones, they have open source software in there. It is free and available to all Usually the agreement is that if you make any modifications or changes, you have to publish the code by which you're using, so that others can kind of grow and develop off of what you have created. But on the other hand, it requires the purchase of a license to commercial software requires you to purchase a license to be able to use it. And there are different types of licenses. So for companies, there's usually the advantage that open source is free 99. So there is the draw to that, but usually it's kind of buggy. It requires a higher knowledge of using computers to be able to use it. So the administrative level on open source software tends to be a little bit higher. So there is that cost on the other end versus paying for it up front. Commercial software has ongoing support, updates, upgrades, things like that along the way, but you may have to buy licenses for all of your systems. So personal license versus an enterprise license. So an individual software license entitles a single user to install and use the piece of commercial software. Enterprise license purchase is based on the number of seats or devices on which the software can be legally installed. So for a corporate, let me go back to this real quick. For a corporate license, they may buy 100 seats, so to speak. So you have 100 computers, you'd put the license on the computers, but you may be hot seating people into those seats. Like if has anybody here ever worked at a call center? Where, when you're getting up, somebody else is getting in that desk and operating from it, you're hot seating into it. So they wouldn't need to purchase a license for me and Mark if we're kind of hot seating at the same desk. We have a single unit that we're using, and the two of us can use that single unit. So there is that with the enterprise license, and they buy them in bulk. Make sense? All right, PII, or personally identifiable information.
Kelly?
Yes.
So are you referring to like the queues on that? I guess the software that's used for the queues in the call center setting? That will be enterprise?
Well, what I'm talking about is if I have 100 computers, I'm buying I'm buying an enterprise pack of licenses, an enterprise license for 100 machines. But say I have people that work in 8-hour shifts. I have, 2 to 3 shifts a day at the same computer. So I don't need to buy a new license for every single employee, only for the individual machines I'm using it on. So that's what I'm saying. So we can hot seat
license for each workstation. I'm sorry.
Yes.
So like a license for each workstation.
Yes.
Okay. Good question, Jerusalem. Thank you, guys.
Mm-hmm. All right. PII, or personally identifiable information. This is any piece of information about a user that can be used alone or in combination with other pieces of information to identify an individual user. Birthdays, social security numbers, addresses, full names, things like that. So now, predominantly, it is the responsibility of the organization to protect the PII that they may possess. It is especially important in certain regulated industries such as healthcare and finance to make sure that this stuff does not get out. There are specific rules that govern these particular types of organizations. So the danger of leaking PII is that much of this information, like addresses and stuff like that, can be used for identity theft, which is a huge concern nowadays. I think we've mentioned it a couple of times. The average person has their identity stolen 4 times throughout the course of a year, which is particularly nasty. The guy who created, LifeLock, used to roll around with a social security number on trucks, basically saying, if you could steal my identity successfully, I will pay you X amount of money. He ended up having to pay that money out and had to get his social security number changed. So if anybody remembers those commercials, that unfortunately backfired pretty heavily on that guy. It's not to say it's not a good service or what have you. I mean, mostly what they're doing is putting fraud alerts on everything that you own or all your, like all the crediting systems. But it is not foolproof. As we say, there is no silver bullet to cybersecurity protection. It's a layering approach. All right. Communication techniques and professionalism. So understand your audience and speak to your audience. You're going to speak differently to customers and supervisors than you would to teammates. If you're speaking to a customer, use proper language, avoid jargon, acronyms, and slang when applicable. Maintain a positive attitude and project confidence. That's the toughest one for people to kind of remember. You know, like if somebody calls you up and says, I'm having a problem with this, you're like, reboot. You know, if somebody's just kind of giving you they're a little like timid in their responses to you, are you going to have a lot of confidence that they're going to be able to solve your problem? No, you want to absolutely and, utterly give them the impression that I know what I'm doing. I'm here to solve your problem. I'm going to help you. So project confidence.
We're going to go ahead and do the King method right away.
Yes, King method out of the gate. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to destroy all of your data, but you will have no more problems. Actively listen, take notes. And it's always nice to kind of like just politely ask, and this is a great one in interviews, like if you're going into an interview in person, just ask the interviewer, hey, do you mind if I take notes while we're talking? So lets them know that you're actually paying attention to what they're saying. You care about the information they're providing you, have some questions in pocket before you go in so that you can ask them a few questions, look up the companies. We'll get into that a little bit later, but just things like that. Avoid interrupting the customer as much as possible. Be culturally sensitive. The biggest one I like to point out is Americans have the largest personal bubble of any other culture on the planet. And I tried explaining this to a friend of mine and he did not believe me. And I said, basically it's for strangers. Your personal bubble is about 12 feet. That seems like a lot, but think about whenever you're outside or in an area, you're talking to strangers, you generally keep them at about 10 to 12 feet. To get to 3 to 6 feet, they have to be a close friend or family member to be within 3 to 6 feet. To get inside that 3-foot range, they have to be somebody you are intimate with. That is the American personal bubble. That is the general range to which we keep people at a distance. Now, this is where cultural sensitivity comes into place. If you're dealing with somebody, say from the Middle East, they tend to have a much smaller personal bubble, and they like to be very close when they are communicating with you. This is not them trying to be intrusive. It's just a cultural norm. And so when you're dealing with somebody from that area, when they get close, it tends to be, Americans tend to get very, very uncomfortable, try to back away and start to get a little bit freaked out because they're not understanding of the culture that they're dealing with. So understanding the cultures where people you're dealing with are coming from can avoid missteps. So be on time. If you're going to be late, even if it's just a couple minutes, if you can see the building and you're in traffic, call the customer and say like, hey, I can see you. I'm going to be there in about 5 minutes. I'm just in a little bit of traffic. It was a little bit thicker than I thought. Let them know before you're late that, hey, I'm running behind. Be respectful of their time. So the moment you're not going to make it there on time, you let them know at that point, or call your dispatch. If if they're the ones who are routing, you say, hey man, I'm like 5-10 minutes out. I'm going to be, about 5 minutes late. You might want to go ahead and call them and just let them know. Avoid distractions, personal calls, texting, social media sites, stuff like that. When you're on site talking to a customer, silent your phone, put it in your pocket. If it's your dispatch or your boss calling you, ask customers, okay, if you step away for a second, make sure it's important. If it's something that can wait, say, hey, I'm with a customer. Can we talk about this here in a little bit? And then, make sure to call them back and address it at that point. But don't be on personal calls when you're dispatching, things like that. When you're dispatching, when you're working on a machine or something like that, if you're physically on site, don't be on personal calls and talking to your family, about, what we're going to do this weekend, or, any of that kind of fun stuff. It can wait. I would save it for emergencies. Deal with difficult customers or situations. Remember, try to de-escalate the situation before you can start working on the problem. If their emotions are heightened, if they're extremely agitated or aggravated, it's going to be hard to get productive information out of them. So try to calm them down beforehand and reassure them that you're here to help them and you're trying to solve that situation before you continue on with the problem. Try not to escalate and match their level of agitation, because unfortunately that just makes things significantly worse. All right, set and meet expectations and timelines and communicate the status with the customer. One of the things you want to try to avoid is giving absolutes like, yeah, this will absolutely be taken care of in 30 minutes or less. Well, things can come up. You may be treating a symptom rather than the main problem, and you don't want to lie to the customer. So you say, like, it looks like we'll have this solved, shortly or in this amount of time. Regardless of the situation, I will give you an update in about 30 minutes or so. So set expectation, timelines for communication, and live up to those timelines. Set alarms on your phone or in your emails or something like that. If you tell them you're going to call them in 2 days, set a calendar reminder. You can have like a particular time of day between like 3 and 5 where you do follow-up calls with customers. And then each day you add to that calendar all the customers that you need to contact that day to be able to do a proper follow-up. So you deal appropriately with customers and confidential and private materials. If you sit down at a computer and they have a spreadsheet open for the like for their financials or any of that kind of stuff, back out and say, hey, do you want to save and close these out? If there is like a roster of the people in the company with their bonus structures printed out next to you, they're in HR, flip it over. You don't want to have the responsibility of having access to confidential material. So you try to limit that as much as possible. Questions or comments?
So we want to mind our business at all times.
Yes, ma'am.
Gotcha.
That is absolutely true. Change management overview. So in the book, they have a chapter, or in the operational procedures chapter, they give you kind of a breakdown on change management best practices. I highly encourage you read that. They may ask you a few questions. Those questions tend to revolve around a few particular pieces of it, but it's good reading, good knowing that before you step into the 1002. I received probably about 3 or 4 questions with regards to change management. What about you, Mark?
Yeah, about the same. About the same. It wasn't really in depth, just kind of some of the fundamentals.
10,000 foot level.
Yeah.
So when you're making changes to technical systems, there's always the chance issues will arise. So change management is the implementation of policies and procedures to reduce the risk of such issues causing a disruption of service. So infrastructure, IT infrastructure library, the ITIL, has become an industry standard for best practices in the documentation and delivery of IT services. So through ITIL, configuration management is employed using the following: the CI, or configuration item, which is an asset that requires specific management procedures. You have the baseline, which is the current configuration of that system and the baseline to which you're working with. If somebody calls you and says, hey, my system is running slow, you need to run a baseline on that machine to know what slow means right now. Hopefully you have a baseline on that machine from, when the machine was installed, so you know what it normally should operate at versus now, and you can compare the two. So you set that baseline before you begin your work, and then after the work is complete, you run another baseline, and you can see if any difference has been made. Because unfortunately, when somebody says my machine is running slow, that is a subjective statement. You want to get an objective number to associate with that. All right, CMS, configuration management system. And this is tools and database to collect, store, manage, update, and present information about CIs, which are your assets. All right, documenting business processes. This could essentially include everything that happens within a business during the workday. Some people call these SOPs, or standard operating procedures. So it should include such important changes such as when new employees are hired or an employee leaves the business. What is the standard procedures when somebody comes on board and when they leave? This may include interns. If you have interns that come in seasonally and leave, how do you set them up? What is the procedures for them coming in? What's the procedures for when they leave? Also, how are these tasks accomplished within the business, including how systems and networks are configured, who can make changes, and the process of requesting those changes. Does it have to come from a supervisor? Does it have to come from a manager, regional director? Or can the frontline employee themselves say, hey, I need access to this? All of this needs to be in place so that you know what is, acceptable and not with regards to making changes to the systems. This page you want to take a picture of. Yes, Jessica.
If we could go back to the previous slide for just a moment.
I wanted one way.
Lies. I wanted to ask, is this one of those situations where documented business processes like the SOPs, where you may be the creator of that for a company if it's like a small one?
Well,
or like on the smaller size?
You may be the creator of that for your department. So interestingly, like one of my first office jobs,
or like the IT department to
possibly. It may be, yeah. I mean, one of the first jobs I had when I came out of college, I was a broker for a transportation company. This company had been around for 15, 20 years. I kid you not, when I got hired on there, I was escorted to a desk by my manager and he said, there's your computer, there's your phone, go make money. That was my orientation. There was no training.
The good old days.
Hey, this is what you need to do. None of that stuff. Well, about 2 years in, me and a guy who got hired the same day I did, we started writing these SOPs. Like, how do we look for trucks? How do we look for customers? How do we, we took all the business things that we did on a regular basis and we started writing a manual for new employees when they come in, because we didn't want them to suffer like we did. It was like 3 months before we knew what we were doing.
Gotcha.
So this may or may not be in place. You may need to create it. And it may be that you just need to create it for your department. It may be that you're brought in to do a job that hasn't been done before for the company. You need to kind of create this role. Like they have an IT department, but they don't have anybody that does cybersecurity. So you come in and you start creating cybersecurity standard operations and procedures and training manuals for employees.
Okay.
So yeah, you may be responsible to do some of this stuff. Maybe not all of it for the entire company, but maybe for portions of it.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Take a picture of this page. Know these three things as much as possible. Risk analysis is basically analyzing the risks associated with performing the change or not performing the change. Do we update our systems or do we not update our systems? What's the risk associated with it? If we update our systems, our current in-house software may not interact with it properly, and we may not be able to operate efficiently on a daily basis, or we may be shut down completely. What are the risks of not updating our systems? Well, we might have some security threats, or vulnerabilities that this update is fixing. And if we don't update, we'll be vulnerable to cyber attack or people stealing information from us. So you need to understand the risks associated with whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Next, you would need to set up a change board. The change board may be multiple people, it may just be one person. Hopefully you have at least 2 or 3 on this board. So depending on the size of the business and the scope of the things you're trying to do, if you're trying to change the systems for the entire company, there may be multiple people on this board. They review all of the documentation and will give you a go, no-go ruling on whether or not this change should go forward. Or if anything needs to be modified with the changes you're making. Like while you're in process, things need to go to the change board for approval. They will give you a go, no-go with regards to, yes, we can alter the change plan in this manner, or no, we need to stick with the original plan, or yes, this change plan can go forward, or no, we're good how we're at. And most importantly, this is where many of the questions derive. You need to have a backup plan. If the change you're implementing is not going the way it should, you need to have a way to come back to the way things were. If you're updating the software and then you determine that the in-house software you have will not function with the new updated software, you have to be able to back out of what you're doing in order for the business to continue to operate. So a backup plan is a must. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints? All right. Best practices. Ensure there is a separate document for each system, server, and network. Use your ITIL for configuration management. Be sure you're documenting the need for the change. Is there a purpose to what we're doing? Or are we just changing for change's sake? Hopefully there is a business reason why we're going through this process. So we need to document why we're doing that change. Utilize a change board for approval to give you that go or no go. And if you're making requests for alteration of the change plan that you're making, you need to have somebody to oversee that. Try your best. I know it's impossible sometimes to see all the variables, but you need to do your best to try to figure it out. See what changes you're making and how it may affect other systems or departments. It could be you're updating the systems in accounting, and that can affect HR because all of a sudden your people aren't getting paid, or you don't know what they're supposed to get paid. Every change you're doing must have a backup plan prior to moving forward with the change. The timing of the changes must be considered to minimize the impact of businesses. If we're updating systems, we will do it in waves. Like we may do, 10 people in operations and 3 managers every night, for the next 2 or 3 months. So we would do this in waves, typically during business lulls, so we're not interfering with day-to-day operations. That is the key. And once the change has been implemented, a thorough assessment should be completed to assist with future change management projects. What worked? What didn't? What could be done better? It's kind of like a postmortem on what it is you just did. And you're documenting everything from the cost of the change the time involved, all that kind of fun stuff. So if ever a change is coming up later, they can go back to this project and say, hey, this was our roadmap here. Here's what it cost us. Here's how long it took. Here's how many people were involved. And this is the procedures they use in order to go forward. It may not be the exact same thing, but they can use it as a template for future projects. Questions, comments, concerns? You may be asking yourself, gosh, is there a lab where we can practice all this stuff? Is there some way we can sit there and work on it? No, there is no test out lab. I'm sorry.
One of the very few we don't have one for.
All right. Now, we should be able to describe the appropriate safety procedures for different technical scenarios. Apply the appropriate controls when faced with a scenario involving potential environmental impacts. Summarize the process of addressing prohibited content, activity, and explain privacy, licensing, and policy concepts. Also, be able to summarize the guidelines for using the basic change management best practices.